Good morning to you. 11:37 is the time. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Let's talk right now about why the Supreme Court is having a two-day hearing today and tomorrow to define, well, what a woman is. Because I thought we already knew. Well, we certainly used to until a few years ago, even if the Prime Minister's a little bit unsure. Let's talk about what this case is all about with Helen Joyce. She's Director of Advocacy at the brilliant Sex Matters Group. She's also author of the great book Trans, Gender Identity and the New Battle for Women's Rights. Good morning to you, Helen. Can we hear? Hello, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
We can hear you. Sorry, for some reason I couldn't quite hear then. Thank you so much. So can we Janet and John this? Okay, what on earth is a bunch of Supreme Court justices doing? Having hearing a two-day case about what a woman is. Since when did we need that to be done?
OK, so what happened was that in 1975, the government passed the Sex Discrimination Act, which was mainly to stop people discriminating against women, although also it can stop people discriminating against men. And then in 2010, it passed the Equality Act, which rolled in the Sex Discrimination Act along with stuff about race, disability, etc., etc. And in between those two things, it passed the Gender Recognition Act, which allows people to get a birth cert stating their sex as the opposite sex to their actual biological sex. And that holds for some legal purposes, definitely, like pensions and marriage, and not other legal purposes, definitely, like parenthood and sex crimes. The question is, does it hold for the Equality Act? Did the government in 2004 change the meaning of sex discrimination from 1975 in the act that landed in 2010? So we argue at Sex Matters we're intervening in this case and we'll be heard giving oral arguments for an hour quite soon.
And the case is actually being brought by another sort of sex-based rights group, For Women Scotland. I know like J.K. Rowling has been very supportive of them over this. And their argument, and this all came up in Scotland massively, didn't it, over things like, Isla Bryson. Was he, because he's a man or a woman, and whether or not he should be in a women's prison? And we had the likes of Nicola Sturgeon, who ended up falling by the wayside pretty soon afterwards, getting into a very tangled mess in an interview, didn't she, where she was trying to answer whether or not this convicted double rapist should be in a women's prison or not, and whether or not he was a man or a woman. And he all got very confused. And basically this
is... It is enormously confused. It really is. I mean...
But it is quite bizarre because the key thing is that there's a debate about what's on a piece of paper. So someone can get a piece of paper that says that they are now legally, their gender is a man or a woman. And the real issue has been about men changing their gender to women, hasn't it?
That's right. And whether or not... Isla Bryson didn't, by the way.
Yes.
Isla Bryson is a man for the
just identified as, yes. As is mostly the case, indeed. but also about whether... And then there's the sex-based rights, which are based on the fact that women's bodies are different and women have different life experiences as victims of sex crime and violence and things like that, but also just the need for not to be in, for instance, a changing room or a toilet or a refuge or a prison with a man. This was kind of all clear and understood years back, and I think people like you and me were very much very supportive of people who believed that they were born in the wrong body, being able to live a life unfettered, unbothered and carrying on their life. But and I didn't really mind if someone changed their name or changed their gender, but it's now got very confused. And the big issue, isn't it, is whether people getting confused between the word sex and the word gender. And those are two completely different things.
I mean, I wouldn't say it was exactly that, to be honest, because I think most people just mean sex when they say gender.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's true.
What the problem is the Equality Act, by allowing people to move into the sex category that they're not in, has turned the two groups, men and women, into mixed sex categories. That's if the Scottish government is right.
Yeah.
But if you have men are a mixed sex category and women are a mixed sex category, you can't say anything about sex discrimination, you can't set up single sex services, you can't argue for them, you can't do an equality impact assessment. You basically have broken sex discrimination law. So we're arguing that there's a way through the law that gets you to the point that actually the Gender Recognition Act doesn't affect the Equality Act. And then you can start to roll back all the nonsense that you very ably set out about things like rapists in women's jails and that. This is the start of unrolling the nonsense.
Well, we hope so. Of course, it depends how the justices rule. I mean, it won't change your or my or the average person's understanding of what a woman is. But so many people in government, in opposition, in the civil service, the NHS, running schools, running large corporations, it would seem. So many people seem to be very confused about this these days.
So, including the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which has put in it's giving oral arguments as well, yes, and it's saying that the law did change the meaning of man and woman, but it says that's a very bad thing and Parliament needs to fix it. Yeah. So the Supreme Court could do that. I have to say the ambiguity is the worst thing, Julia. Like, if actually we have broken Sex Discrimination Act and there is no longer anything in law that says you can't discriminate against actual women as a group, then we have to fix it. At the moment, they play bait and switch. They say, no, we still protect women. And then when you say, well, OK, can you protect women here? They're like, no, trans women are women. Yeah. So we need, either way, we need clarity. I mean, obviously, I hope they agree that women still exist for the purposes of sex discrimination.
And not just a figment of men's imagination on a Wednesday afternoon, which is how I always put it. But this has impacted. Lots of people are saying, why women like you? Why are you so obsessed with this? What's your issue? This doesn't really affect you. But of course it does. We're looking at women's sport. Both girls in primary school playing sport, and in secondary school and college and at the Olympics. We're looking at women's safety in changing rooms, in toilets, girls' safety particularly in toilets at schools. We're talking about, even when they talk about equal pay and they worry about gender pay differences. Well, if you include a load of men who identify as women, that's going to skew it. We're looking at crimes. I mean, what happens when men identify as women, largely with all their bits intact, skewing the crime rates. I mean, women's sex crime and violent crime rate has rocketed in the last few years. How on earth has that happened? Because a huge number of men are pretending they are women for their purposes. And we've had police forces, judges, records recording these as female crimes when they are men.
And the Equality Act doesn't say you have to do any of that, which is what the government say whenever we bring it up. They say, but, there are exceptions. There are these things in the Equality Act called the single-sex exceptions, but people are too afraid to use them. And so, this is a law that just isn't working. They say that it could work, but it isn't. So that's why I say we need clarity. If the law is actually comprehensively broken and it is a fact that you cannot define women properly and you cannot protect women, I'd rather know that so that we can start to campaign to fix it and not have this awful situation at the moment where the muddle means that we can neither fix it because we can't get them to admit that it's wrong, or actually say it isn't broken in the first place. So good that For Women Scotland brought this case. I hope it's the right outcome, but either way, we have to go through this. The only way out of this mess is through it.
Yeah, I often think when things are improving, when we had the CAS review in terms of children who were being treated as if they were transgender, and the puberty blockers, and then the SEDS finally being seen on Isla Bryce. But there are still men in women's prisons. There are still girls who are being forced to go to toilets that are unisex in schools. So I can't think of anything worse when you're a teenage girl than that. I can't think of anything worse for the teenage boys as well. But there are still these issues. People are still getting sacked. People are still getting investigated by the police for saying things like, trans women are men, which is what they are. This is, we've still got a Prime Minister who thinks that 0.1% of women have a penis. I mean, Claire and I have already done our check today. Have you checked whether you've grown yours today yet, Helen?
Well, online they do love to say, how do you know? Have you ever checked your chromosomes? I've given birth twice, so I can be pretty sure.
I'm going out on a limb here. I think you're solid on that one. But here's the thing. The Supreme Court's going to have this hearing today and tomorrow. We're not going to get any ruling probably for a few months.
No, not till next year.
Till next year. I never understand why these things take so long. They're very slow readers, these Supreme Court justices. So when we get that ruling, they'll either rule in favour which we hope, a bit of sanity. If they don't, and then they say, well, maybe this is something Parliament needs to deal with. What hopes do you have that a Parliament with 412 Labour MPs is going to actually deal with this?
I mean, at the moment, they hide behind the law isn't broken. If the Supreme Court says the law is broken, I think that really gives us something to work with. Okay. And I think we've also seen how very, very unpopular the transgender agenda is, that sex isn't real, or that men can become women, or that you can sterilise kids if they say they're the opposite sex or whatever. We've seen how unpopular that is in the most recent American election. Yeah. And I do think that politicians here are looking at that. And they're trying to avoid it because they think talking about it is a bad idea, and it probably is for them. But I mean, whatever way this goes, unless it's a fundamental yes, woman means really woman, adult human female, anything else at least gives us something to go back to the government with and say, look, you said this isn't broken. It is. Now fix it.
Yeah, indeed. And we know J.K. Rowling has been battling on this and also battling on British Transport Police at the moment for allowing trans officers, i.e. men who are identifying as women, to strip search women, vulnerable women, often in a very, very defenceless situation, being allowed to be strip searched by a man who simply has put on women's clothing and identified as women. I mean, we are in a world that's gone mad. We really are that we're in this situation.
Helen, I mean, that's a Sex Matters case. We're taking that for judicial review.
Fantastic. I love your work. Brilliant work. Helen Joyce at Sex Matters, thank you very much for joining us. Quick thought from Claire Pearce, who's been nodding along to all this. Bearing in mind, your boss, who is your boss, the MP you work for?
Caroline Noakes.
Caroline Noakes. She was chair of the Women's and Equality Select Committee and doesn't believe that trans women, well, doesn't know that trans women are men.
I know, and we have this debate all the time, and I think that we need people like Helen, who is just awesome. She needs to come into government, be Minister for Women.
She needs to have a word with your boss. There we are.
Shall I bring her in next time?
Oh, totally. Well, she won't come on. Your boss won't come on my show because she thinks I'm transphobic, because I don't believe mad things.
But she always sends her very best
to
you.
11:48 is the time. This is still... We are the Home of Common Sense.